Greetings, dear listener. Here is a tale both small and great. The story of a boy no bigger than a walnut, but with a heart as bold as a lion's. Tom Thumb is a tale of cleverness, of mischief and adventure, and through it we see that it is not the size of one's body, but the spirit within that truly shapes a hero. So, settle in, relax, breathe, and let your imagination wander off into slumber. Tom Thumb, adapted from the selected tales of the Brothers Grimm as a story to relax to, and read by me, John Donaldson. Once upon a time, in a quiet village tucked between gentle hills and fields of waving wheat, there lived a poor peasant and his wife. Their days were filled with honest, hard work, tending the garden, mending tools, and carrying out the small tasks that make up the simple life. But their hearts remained heavy. They both dearly longed for a child. Though their cottage was warm and their table never entirely empty, it was the silence that troubled them most. No cheerful clatter echoed through their rooms. No little footsteps pattered on the wooden floor. The absence of a child made their home feel incomplete. One evening, as the man sat beside the fire, with his hands wrapped around a cup of warm broth, he turned to his wife and spoke of their wish once more. He said he would be happy with even the tiniest child, no bigger even than a thumb, if only he could hold a son in his arms. His wife smiled sadly, placing her hand over his, as if hoping her quiet prayer might take root in the flickering firelight. To their astonishment, not long afterward, the woman became pregnant. And when the baby was born, he was, indeed, no larger than a thumb, but perfect in every way. His limbs were strong, his features fine and sweet, and his eyes sparkled with an unusual brightness. His laughter rang like the tinkling of a tiny bell, and his parents were filled with a joy so deep that it washed away all the years of longing. They named him Tom Thumb, and treated him not as something strange, but as the treasure he truly was. Though he remained no taller than his name described, Tom's cleverness quickly became apparent. He learned to speak early, and his tiny hands were nimble and fast. He found clever solutions to tasks that others would find impossible at his size. His father often watched in awe as the little boy darted through tight spaces, balanced on the rim of a bowl to help his mother stir the dough for the bread, or climbed the broom handle to reach a high shelf. One bright morning, as the dew still clung to the grass and the sun began its gentle climb over the village rooftops, Tom's father stood beside their wooden cart, adjusting the leather harness straps. He had a tired and worried expression on his face. The forest lay ahead, dense and deep, and the cartload he needed to lead would be heavy. He muttered to himself about how much easier the task would be if he had someone to help him guide the horse. The narrow trail that twisted through the woods would require careful handling, and the journey, though familiar, always required every little bit of his energy. Tom, who had been sitting nearby on a smooth pebble no larger than a stool for him, heard his father's complaint and stood up eagerly. He immediately offered his help, speaking with a confidence that contradicted his tiny frame. His father smiled at the suggestion, charmed by his son's enthusiasm, but gently reminded him that handling a horse required strength and size, neither of which Tom possessed. But Tom stood firm, insisting that his voice and his intelligence were all the strength that he needed. His father, both curious and amused, decided to give him a chance. He lifted his son gently, placing him near the horse's head, and watched in astonishment as Tom climbed effortlessly up the leather straps and sat in the horse's ear as if it were the most natural thing in the world. From his position, Tom called out gentle commands, soft clicks of the tongue, short words spoken with clarity. At first, the horse shifted its head, confused by the strange tickle in its ear and the tiny sound. But the calmness in Tom's tone seemed to soothe the animal. With each command, it responded, turning its head or lifting a hoof in the direction that Tom wanted. Soon the cart was rolling forward, the wheels creaking gently as they passed through the village. Villagers paused in their morning routines to watch in wonder. Some laughed and pointed, while others simply stood in silence, amazed by what they saw. Tom's father walked behind, unable to hide his pride. He called out to a neighbor that his boy, small as he was, had more sense and courage than many grown men. And by the time they reached the edge of the forest, he felt a warmth rise in his chest, knowing that his son, no bigger than a thumb, was already proving to be someone truly extraordinary. After returning from the forest, Tom Thumb sat on the wooden fence outside his family's cottage, his legs dangling like little branches of a sapling, his chest still full of pride from guiding the cart so cleverly. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in golden colours, and the air carried the warm scent of hay and distant chimney smoke. As he sat resting, 2 finely dressed strangers rode by on horseback, their leather satchels bouncing at their sides, their cloaks trailing dust in the breeze. They were traders, men used to unusual sights, but when their eyes landed on the boy, no taller than their palms, they stopped in their tracks. They exchanged hushed words, their eyes gleaming with excitement. One leaned toward the other and suggested that such a curiosity could draw crowds in the city. People would pay good money to see a living child so small. He imagined fairs and noble houses where Tom would be treated like a marvel, a wonder of nature. They approached Tom's father with eager expressions and silver in their hands. They made promises of care and comfort, saying that the boy would not suffer, but would instead travel, see new lands, and enjoy admiration wherever he went. The father hesitated. His heart was torn. He loved his son deeply and feared what dangers the world might bring. But Tom, who had been listening intently from where he sat, spoke up. He assured his father that he was ready to see more of the world, that his cleverness would keep him safe, and that he longed to learn what lay beyond their little village. Trusting in his son's brave spirit, the father agreed. With kisses from both parents and a hopeful farewell, Tom climbed into the open palm of one of the traders, who lifted him gently as if holding a delicate jewel. But the novelty of being carried in pockets and admired like an ornament quickly wore thin. One night, weeks later, as the men camped beneath a broad tree at the edge of another forest, Tom felt a deep discomfort. Though their words had promised wonder, he felt more like an object than a boy. As the traders drifted into sleep, their snores rising and falling with the crackle of the fire, Tom wriggled free of the wool-lined pocket where he had been kept. He scrambled down the trader's coat, slipped through the grass like a beetle, and found a small mouse hole nestled in the roots of a tree. With a final glance behind him, he vanished into the darkness, leaving the traders oblivious to his departure until the next morning. As Tom wandered alone through the thick forest, the light grew dim under the heavy canopy of leaves. Soft ferns brushed his tiny legs, and birds sang high in the trees. Even though he was small, he walked with confidence, slipping between roots and rocks like a quick little squirrel. As the sky darkened and shadows stretched across the ground, he suddenly heard quiet voices nearby, low and hurried, with a secret tone. Curious, Tom crept toward the sound and hid among the twisted roots of a large old tree. Peeking out, he saw two rough-looking men sitting beside a fallen log. They spoke in whispers, their eyes looking around, and it became clear to Tom that they were planning to rob a rich farmer who lived just outside the forest nearby. They talked about silver hidden in chests and fresh bread in the cupboards. They were sure no one would catch them if they moved quickly in the night. Tom listened carefully, and a playful idea grew in his mind. He stepped out from the bushes and spoke, his voice no louder than a breeze. The thieves jumped in surprise when they saw the tiny talking boy, no bigger than a thumb. But then he told the men that he could slip into places no grown person ever could, through cracks, under doors, behind shelves. If they wanted to get inside without anyone knowing, he was their best choice. After a moment of thinking, they looked at each other and smiled. They realized he could be very useful. One of the men gently picked him up and placed him into a little bag. Then the two thieves made their way toward the farmhouse, whispering with excitement. They laughed softly, saying the job would be easy now that they had such a clever little helper. As they walked, the forest around them grew still. The last light of the sun faded from the sky, and bats fluttered quietly among the treetops. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance, and the thieves moved like shadows across the open field, staying low and close to the hedge. Tom, carried in the little bag, peeked through a small tear in the cloth and watched the farmhouse draw near. A soft yellow glow came from an upstairs window, and the chimney sent up a thin trail of smoke. It looked warm and peaceful, innocent of the sneaky business the thieves had planned. But Tom had no plan to help them. As they reached the farmhouse, they quietly pushed him through a small open window. The kitchen was dark and still, with a faint fire glowing in the fireplace. Instead of sneaking around, though, Tom climbed onto a chair, then up onto the table, and with a grin he shouted loudly, asking which treasure he should steal first, the warm bread or the silver coins. Because the house was so silent, his little voice rang out like a bell. The thieves outside waved their arms frantically and hissed at him to be quiet, but Tom only shouted louder. Lights flickered on upstairs, and heavy footsteps came running down the stairs. The farmer, holding a lantern and a thick stick, rushed into the kitchen. But just before the farmer arrived, Tom had quickly jumped down and hid in a corner, then crawled up into the hayloft above the kitchen. The thieves, now full of fear and anger, ran off into the night, shouting curses at the boy who had fooled them. Tom curled up in the soft hay, smiling to himself. The house slowly grew quiet again. As the firelight flickered below in the kitchen and the wind brushed against the windows, he rested peacefully until just before dawn, proud of the clever trick he had played. After escaping the noise and trouble at the farmhouse, Tom made his way deeper into the dark forest. The trees grew taller and closer together, their thick branches forming a roof above his head. Less light reached the ground, and the path became harder to see. The air was cool and damp, and the forest seemed to whisper with distant sounds, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and the soft movements of woodland creatures. Tired from his long walk through the forest, and feeling quite small under the huge trees, Tom searched for a safe place to rest. At the base of an old hollow tree, he found a little burrow just big enough for someone his size. It was quiet and dry inside, with a floor made of soft leaves and moss. Tom curled up inside, wrapped his arms around himself, and closed his eyes. He thought at last he might enjoy a peaceful night. But the forest was not finished with him yet. Not far away, a hungry wolf was hunting. Thin and silent, the creature wandered between the trees, sniffing the ground for food. It caught a strange, unfamiliar scent, something small but alive. Following the trail, the wolf crept toward the tree where Tom lay sleeping. Its sharp yellow eyes gleamed in the dark. Then, without warning, it pushed its nose into the burrow, and before Tom could move, swallowed him in a single gulp. Inside the wolf's belly it was dark, wet, and very smelly. The air was hot and hard to breathe, but Tom didn't panic. He kicked as hard as he could and shouted at the top of his lungs. His small voice bounced around the inside of the wolf, surprising and frightening the beast. The wolf howled loudly and ran, just simply ran out of terror. Stumbling through the woods in confusion, its body twisting and jumping as if something inside it was biting and punching from all directions. It crashed through the bushes and ran toward a village, yelping and growling as it went. And as it happened, this was the same village Tom had left weeks before. Tom's father who had stepped outside their cottage with a lantern, heard the strange cries. They were not the normal howls of a wolf. They were high and strange, and as the wolf came closer, he heard, mixed in with the howls, a sound he recognized. He thought he could hear his son's voice, faint but still clear. Heart pounding, he rushed inside, grabbed his sharpest knife, and ran toward the noise. Just as he reached the trees nearest the cottage, the wolf appeared and collapsed in front of him, whining, exhausted and helpless. Without hesitation, the father knelt down and carefully cut into the wolf's belly. With steady hands and a fast heart, he worked quickly. To his great relief, Tom fell out, dirty, damp and coughing, but smiling. His mother rushed out and dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms and holding him as tight as she could. Tears ran down her cheeks as she rocked him back and forth, unable to believe that he had survived yet another adventure. Tom brushed some of the sticky mess off of himself, but gave a cheeky grin, saying that he definitely needed a bath to clean himself of the smell of the wolf. But then he added that maybe it was time to take a break from wild adventures and stay close to home for a while. His parents looked at each other and gave a knowing smile. And so, for a little while, Tom did stay close to home. But a boy like Tom can never stay still for too long. The end. And so ends the tale of Tom Thumb, a boy no taller than a thumb, but with a spirit too big for the world to contain. He walked through danger with courage, turned mischief into triumph, and reminded everyone he met that cleverness often comes in the smallest packages. Thank you, dear listener, for following me in this tale. May it remind you that size does not define strength, and that adventure often begins with a single step or a single thumbprint. Until next time, keep your imagination wide and your heart brave.